Hi. I first started in growth marketing in 2004. Actually, my first job was a part-time job for Google, testing Gmail. I was young and not very smart. If I had known that I could sell Gmail invites for $200 on eBay, I would be a millionaire today. I did not know that. I've spent these 15 years, actually 17, at multiple different companies, most recently Iris, a dating app that uses artificial intelligence for matchmaking. And still today, I'm not very smart. I only learned in these 17 years one thing, and that is what growth looks like. I don't know how to create growth. I know what it looks like. And so let's have a look. In every meeting with an investor or a board of directors that I have ever been in, there's a chart that looks like this. There's an exponential growth curve. It's always there. Of course, when you're showing that exponential growth curve, you're always in the flat part of it. The climb is always somewhere years ahead. Sometimes in internal presentations, you want to show your employees that you're hopeful, but that you're also reasonable. You are realistic. So the curve is a little bit more linear, with maybe just a little bit of a bend. Now, of course, we all know that reality is different. Reality usually looks like this. I just scribbled this. This is a random drawing that I made. The only people who have ever been able to show a true exponential growth curve to investors after the climb are probably Mark Zuckerberg, maybe Jeff Bezos. Almost everybody else over the course of the years has experienced a contraction. Maybe you think you're Steve Jobs. If you have your startup, you're so optimistic. You think that because you're Steve Jobs, you're not going to experience this. Maybe you think I'm lying. I have actually never seen a company that didn't have some contraction sometime. If you think I'm lying, you are absolutely right. Because, whoops, what did I do? There you go, thank you. Because I did not draw this curve. This is Apple's annual revenue between, 1984 and 2005. The largest company in the world by market capitalization has actually experienced this before they have become a 2-point-something trillion dollar company. So even Steve Jobs went through this. Now, in spite of all that, in spite of all this, every time that we speak about growth, we only talk about the upside. We talk about the nice side of growth. We talk about building. We talk about hacking growth because it's sexy. But we never talk about that reality. What do we do when a company is flat or it's shrinking? What do we do when the CFO walks in the room and says, we have to cut 10% of our workforce? We never talk about it. And that's partially because at every growth conference, there is a blank canvas fallacy. That means that we always talk about growth, not realizing that sometimes growth is not like building a house, it's like remodeling a house. And when you remodel a house, something's gonna have to be destroyed. And it can be a lot of things, but something has to go. And so today, what I'm really talking about is how to rebuild I've been a little provocative. I think that there's an element there where you have to let people go, and so that's one element, but that is not the central element of rebuilding ever. I'm a big believer in addition by subtraction. I will give you an example a little bit later of an experience I have actually lived through of how a business can start growing again, or start growing for the first time, by removing things instead of adding them, by destroying things instead of building them. The first one I love is eliminating organizational bloatware. Bloatware, if you're not familiar with it, is all that software that your computer comes equipped with and that always slows it down when it starts up. You don't need it, but it's there. And it's always there, and every company has bloatware. Bloatware always stands in the way of growth. Bloatware is a ridiculous presentation that nobody needs, a report that nobody needs, but somebody makes every month and circulates every month. All of these things are epidemic at every company, and the older the company is, the more bloatware there is. Just like I said before, that to grow doesn't always mean to build. The opposite is also true. To build doesn't always mean to grow. Sometimes you have to, you're building something that is not conducive to growth at all. This is a quote from Steve Jobs, who said, "Focus is about saying no." I've seen a lot of this, and sometimes when companies are in trouble, or when companies are just looking, they're not in trouble, but they are looking for a new way to grow, they don't know what to focus on. They start just collecting random ideas, and they pursue all of them. The more ideas you pursue, the less focused you are. The less focused you are, the more bloatware you build, and the less successful the company ultimately becomes. This is a good time for a short story. I work for this dating company right now called Iris. And over the last 6 months, we have been extremely active in influencer marketing. We launched a hashtag on TikTok, and we signed deals with hundreds of influencers. Signing up an influencer is a complex process. One person has to reach out to the influencer, they have to negotiate, then you have to sign a contract, then that contract has to go to an accountant, it has to go to a legal department, then somebody has to pay the influencer. There's a whole very long process. We did it with one employee. She signed almost 500 influencers in 2 months. And that's because everything other than the conversations between her and the influencer was automated. She never had to send a contract to an accountant or to a lawyer. She never had to do anything. We made everything for her on the back end. And what's even more interesting is that I did it. I am not an engineer. I cannot develop anything. But I was able to automate every step of her process that wasn't a negotiation, because the technology is already there. There are softwares to do this. You can do it all, but most companies choose not to. And then, of course, this is perhaps the less exciting of those components. When the CFO comes in the room and says, we cannot afford this workforce, we have to reduce by 10, 15, 20%. I'll talk a little bit more about layoffs in a minute. I've had a lot of experience with them. And so I think it's important to look at motivation. Layoffs are always something we talk about starting from the people involved, and that is normal, because letting people losing jobs is a very bad thing. I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to go over the details that are written up there. I'm just going to tell you a story of one company I have actually worked with. The company is called Zoosk. It's an online dating site. I have a lot of experience in that industry. And in 2014, after a botched IPO, the company wanted to go public and they could not do it, they realized that the company had overinvested, overspent, and the CFO, a new CFO, said, we have to cut. And so what they did was what every company does when layoffs are driven by a CFO. The first thing they did was cut equally 15% across all departments. 15% from engineering, 15% from marketing, 15% from product. Every department lost 15% of its workforce. The second thing they did, they started from the bottom. Seniority was a big factor. The more senior you were, the less likely you were to lose your job. It's a terrible thing. And the message was, we're just going to have to work harder to accomplish the same level of production, the same revenue, and because we're spending less on people, we'll be fine. Now, of course, that layoff did not work, not one bit. 12 months later, the CFO walked into the room and said, we have to cut 30% of the workforce, twice as many. This time we did things differently. There was a whole new team that was part of I had been at Zoosk previously, I had survived the earlier layoff. Only this time I was part of the senior team, the executive team, along with a bunch of other new people. And we realized that just cutting 30% of people across departments is nonsense. There are some departments that are more productive. There is a strategy that the company has. So you start from a strategy. What do you want to do? And depending on what you're trying to do, you decide what people you need. The second thing we realized, and it's not expressed here very clearly, is that another thing we needed to do was lay some technology off. We had a ton of technical debt. We used technologies, some of them were exceptionally good for us, and some of them were useless. So we can't just send away people and think that suddenly everything is going to be good if we don't also think about how to renovate our technological arsenal. We also realized that we had become a lot less productive because we had cut a lot of junior resources, but no middle management, or very little middle management, and very little upper management. We were not lean, we were a bureaucracy. A lot of people sort of, if you think about an example in a canoe in the Olympics, there were 2 people rowing and 5 people calling the pace at which to row. It has to be the other way around. You have 1 motivator and 5 people rowing, you're going to be much more effective. And we realized that we also needed to motivate people. A layoff is incredibly demotivating for folks. And so how do you motivate people in a layoff? And one way to do it is to make their job easier. Automate things for them. So much of the work that a company does, usually, is stuff that can actually already be automated with very easy to access technology. And we did that. So a lot of people who were understandably stressed and scared, when they realized that their job was going to become more interesting, because they did not spend 50% of their time doing a simple, repetitive task that a computer can do, they actually became interested. They realized they could do so much more. They realized that they could invest suddenly 30 or 40% of their time to do something a lot more creative or a lot more useful, and they loved it. The company, within 3 months, started to grow very fast. 15% year on year, which is very fast in an industry that at the time was barely growing. Like the whole online dating industry at the time was growing at less than 5%. We were tripling that, already being a very large company, so it was actually exceptional. And within 3 years, the company was sold for a considerable profit to a competitor. It worked. It was sad. It was a difficult thing to do. But given the situation we were in, refreshing our technology and refreshing our workforce, at the end of the day, made the business profitable. If we had not done that, if we had just maybe prayed and cut an even amount across all departments, we would have not been able to become more productive, more effective. I'm going to leave you with one last thought. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry was a pilot. He was a poet, a journalist, a writer, generally between the two world wars. That's when he was most productive. He once said that perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing more to take away. And that is something that at any time in a business, when you're growing, when you're shrinking, when you're stable, at every time, at any point in time in your business, you have to think about what you can take away to make your business grow faster. Thank you.